He gave them his life, and they gave him a letter. The letter came on a Tuesday. It sat on the kitchen table, stark white against the worn oak, a single, sterile envelope that held the future. I remember the smell of my mother's pot roast in the air, the gentle hum of the refrigerator, all the normal sounds of a life built over 30 years. My father picked it up. I still remember the sound of the envelope tearing. If I'd known what was inside, I would have stopped him from opening it. He held the single sheet of paper, and the color just drained from his face. My mom saw his expression and stopped what she was doing, a dish towel frozen in her hand. The silence in that kitchen was so heavy it felt hard to breathe. That letter was an earthquake. It shattered a life that had been built brick by brick, year by year, sacrifice by sacrifice. For 3 decades, my father had come home from the factory tired and sore, but he always felt secure. He had a promise, a pension that would see my parents through a comfortable old age. That promise, and the life they had built on it, disappeared in that single moment. This isn't just a story about spreadsheets or financial jargon. It's about what happens when the foundation of a family's future turns to sand. It's about my parents, that kitchen table, and that single piece of mail. It's about the quiet, devastating fallout of a broken promise and the brutal lessons I learned about how fragile retirement in America really is. I grew up believing my parents' sacrifices would buy them a secure old age. Then I watched that belief get torn apart, leaving them with a fraction of what they were owed and a feeling of betrayal that still hasn't healed. This is the story of how that promise evaporated overnight, and how their tragedy became a terrifying preview of a crisis that is silently threatening millions more. To really get what they lost, you have to understand what they were building. My father wasn't just an employee at his company. He was a true believer. He worked for a mid-sized manufacturing firm, the kind that used to be the backbone of towns all across the country. It made things you could touch, things that felt solid, and for my dad, the pension felt just as real. It was part of a social contract, that unspoken deal at the heart of the American dream. You give a company your loyalty, your time, your body, and in return, it takes care of you. My father started there at 22. He spent his days on a concrete floor, the air thick with the smell of grease and hot metal. He'd come home with permanently stained hands and a weariness that settled deep in his bones. But he never really complained. Why would he? Every hour he worked, every drop of sweat, was an investment in a future he thought he could count on. The pension wasn't some bonus. It was deferred pay for a lifetime of work. I have these flashes of memory from when I was a kid, little scenes that were all part of this shared belief in the future. I remember my mom at the kitchen table with a calculator and a stack of bills. She ran our house with a thriftiness that was practically an art form. The family car was driven for 15 years. Vacations were simple trips to a nearby lake. New clothes were a back-to-school thing. Whenever I'd ask why we couldn't have something a friend had, the answer was always the same, delivered with my mother's calm certainty. We're saving. It's for the future. And the cornerstone of that future, the thing that made all the little sacrifices worth it, was the pension. That word had a kind of magic to it. Twice a year, a thick envelope would show up from the company. It wasn't just mail, it was an event. Inside was the pension statement. My dad would look it over, a quiet smile on his face before handing it to my mom. She wouldn't just file it away. I can still see her, humming softly as she placed it carefully into a heavy-duty accordion folder labeled Retirement. Watching her, you'd think she was tucking away golden tickets. Each statement was a piece of their future, a promise on paper, getting more and more valuable every year. They'd talk about what they would do with that security. Their dreams were as humble and honest as they were. My dad wanted a small workshop for his woodworking projects. My mom dreamed of a big garden, and I remember her kneeling in our small backyard plot, her hands in the soil, mapping out where the tomatoes and zinnias would go in her real garden one day. My dad once put his arm around me in the backyard, gesturing to it all with a sweep of his hand and saying, "One day you'll inherit this house, this garden, and that workshop." They wanted to help pay for their grandkids' education. They just wanted the peace of mind to know that if one of them got sick, it wouldn't be a financial disaster. They weren't planning for a life of luxury. They were planning for a life without fear. The company felt like a community. The annual picnic was a huge deal. I remember the smell of my dad grilling hot dogs, the scratchy feel of the burlap sacks for the kids' sack races, and the sound of my mom's laughter as she sat with the other wives sharing stories. These were the people my dad worked with for 10, 20, 30 years. They'd shared stories, covered shifts, and complained about the same supervisors. And they were all counting on the exact same promise. That shared belief made everything feel so safe. It felt as permanent as the factory itself. But what none of us knew then was that those promises, the ones we'd sacrificed so much for, were already disappearing. But while they were clipping coupons and saving every penny, someone else was cashing checks they didn't earn. The first sign of trouble was a whisper. A stray comment at the grocery store from a neighbor, Dave, who'd been laid off in the first quiet round. He'd lost his house a few months later. We all felt terrible for him, but we told ourselves he was an outlier. Then came the rumors of a hiring freeze. My dad would mention it at dinner, but just brush it off. "It's a cycle," he'd say. "Things always bounce back." He'd seen the company get through recessions before, but this time was different. The whispers got louder. The local paper ran a tiny article, buried in the business section, about the company needing new lines of credit. Then came more layoffs. The veterans, the old guard like my dad, told themselves they were safe. My father was 5 years away from his retirement date. The idea he wasn't essential was just unthinkable. And then came that Tuesday, and the letter. After my dad read it, his face ashen, he just sank into his chair. "They filed for Chapter 11, he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Bankruptcy. How do you tell someone that everything they've planned for was never real?" The word just hung there, ugly and foreign. The letter was full of corporate speak, restructuring, creditors, financial obligations. But then we got to the line that mattered. It said that as part of the bankruptcy, the company's pension plan would be terminated. Terminated. Such a clean word for something so violent. My mom took the letter, her hand shaking. She read it, and then just stood there, staring at nothing. All those years of saving, all those golden tickets in the accordion folder, all of it was based on a lie. The next few days were a blur. My mother tried to make that same pot roast a week later, as if clinging to a routine could stop the world from spinning. But the house didn't fill with that same warm, comforting smell. It just smelled like cooking meat. The trauma had stolen the memory, tainting it. The company set up a hotline that was always busy. They held a town hall in the high school auditorium. Hundreds of workers showed up, anxious and angry. But the company executives didn't. They sent a low-level HR manager who read from a script. My father went, hoping for answers, but came home early, his face set like stone. He walked in, dropped his keys on the counter, and just said, "They didn't even have the decency to show up." He sat in his chair and didn't speak for the rest of the night. The government sent us a letter next. We thought it would be salvation. We were wrong. This one was from an agency we'd never heard of, the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, the PBGC. It said our pension was insured. For a second, we felt this rush of hope. Insured. But as we kept reading, that hope soured. The letter explained the PBGC doesn't guarantee your full pension. It guarantees a basic benefit, up to a legal limit, and it doesn't cover extras like the early retirement subsidy or the health benefits. My mom tried calling the PBGC hotline herself. I remember her sitting in the kitchen for hours, listening to hold music, before finally getting a human who just kept repeating, "We can't answer that question at this time." She hung up the phone and quietly started to cry. The first check from the PBGC arrived 3 months later. It was for 45% of what my father's pension check was supposed to be. My mother opened the envelope, looked at the number, and let out a sound I'd never heard before. A quiet, hopeless sob of someone who finally understands just how much they've lost. The aftermath was a slow, grinding collapse. The workshop, the garden, that house he promised I'd inherit, those dreams vanished. A few weeks later, I overheard my mom on the phone with her doctor's office. She was canceling an appointment for her arthritis. "Oh, it's feelin' much better," she said, her voice bright and fake. I knew it was a lie. The copay was just too high. Her trips to the grocery store became painful exercises in math. I saw her one day staring at her favorite brand of tea, then quietly putting it back. A month later, I saw the same box hidden in the back of the pantry. She'd used a stack of clipped coupons to buy it, but she hid it like a guilty pleasure, a luxury she no longer felt she deserved. One afternoon, I found my dad in the garage. He was trying to fix an old hand drill, taking it apart and putting it back together. After a few minutes of frustrated silence, he just stopped, letting the pieces fall from his hands. He just gave up. Then he pulled out his old steel-toed work boots and his metal lunch pail. He just stood there looking at them for a long time, then quietly placed them in the trash can. He grew withdrawn. The easy smile I'd known my whole life was just gone. One night, I overheard him apologize to my mom, his voice quiet and broken. "I'm so sorry, honey. I thought I did everything right. I tried to help financially, but they resisted, not out of pride, but out of a deep, heartbreaking fear of becoming a burden. That refusal hurt more than anything. Watching their dignity get stripped away, piece by painful piece, was the hardest thing I've ever had to do." As I watched my parents' lives crumble, one question burned in my mind. How? The answer is a frustrating story of loopholes, shifting priorities, and the quiet dismantling of the American social contract. My family's story is part of a huge shift. My father's generation had defined benefit pensions. The company promised a set amount for life. They took the risk. But starting in the 80s, companies engineered a switch to plans like the 401k. The promise changed. They no longer guaranteed an income for life. They just promised to contribute. All the risk of a market crash of living too long was moved from the corporation to the employee. The pension was like a bridge being built across a canyon. My parents were told it would reach the other side. Instead, the company stopped building it halfway and expected them to jump. So what happened to the money? The key word was in that letter: underfunded. A company is supposed to put enough money aside each year to pay its debts, but they play games. They use shady accounting, assuming sky-high investment returns so they can contribute less cash. It makes their profits look good, but it's a time bomb. One night I saw a news report. The CEO of my dad's company was getting a multi-million-dollar bonus as part of the bankruptcy proceedings. The screen showed his smiling face. At that same moment, I was scrolling through Facebook Marketplace, watching my parents sell the dining room set they'd had for 20 years, just to pay the property taxes. A few days later, the company issued a glowing press release about restructuring for the future. That brings us to the PBGC. It was created by a 1974 law called ERISA, but it's not the rescue line you think. The PBGC isn't a safety net. It's a bandage over a bullet wound. The PBGC does not guarantee your full pension. It ensures a basic benefit up to a legal maximum. For 2025, the most a 65-year-old can get is about $89,181 a year. But if you retire early, as my dad planned to, that maximum gets slashed. Even worse, the PBGC only covers your standard monthly check. It does not cover the company health plan that was supposed to cover them until Medicare. That was gone. It also doesn't cover cost of living adjustments. As I watched prices for gas and groceries climb year after year, I realized this was its own slow-motion betrayal. Their small check was shrinking in value every single day. Inflation was eating their future alive. The system hadn't just broken down. It was a system of loopholes that puts corporate profits ahead of people. My father didn't fail to plan. He was a pawn in a bigger game, and the rules were written by people who would never have to face the consequences. Sometime after, my mom quietly took the accordion folder from the shelf. She had treated it like a vault, but it was really just a box of lottery tickets the system never intended to pay out. One by one, she took out the pension statements, those golden tickets she had saved for decades, and fed them into a shredder. She did it in complete silence. You think the danger ended with pensions? That was just the beginning. My parents' story is about a broken promise from another era. But it wasn't a history lesson. It was a warning. The financial traps have changed, but the risk of an insecure retirement is worse than ever. Fewer people have pensions to lose today, but millions of seniors are being steered into other risky products. One of the biggest is the reverse mortgage. You've seen the ads. A friendly celebrity promising seniors they can tap into their home's equity and live worry-free. But the reality can be a nightmare. The fees are high, and your debt grows fast, eating away the equity you spent a lifetime building. The real trap is the fine print. You still have to pay property taxes and homeowner's insurance. If you fall behind, the lender can foreclose. A shocking number of these loans have ended in default, and HUD data has shown tens of thousands of seniors have faced foreclosure proceedings. The loan also has to be paid back in full if you move out for more than 12 months for health reasons. The family home goes from being a source of security to a ticking time bomb. Now that we have 401ks, our security is chained to the stock market. The CBS 401k Fallout Special showed what the 2008 crash did to people about to retire. Their savings cut in half overnight. That risk is still there. Then there's the silent crisis of healthcare costs. Even with Medicare, out-of-pocket costs can be crushing. The sense of security my parents had is gone. Now it's a patchwork of complicated high-risk solutions. We're all supposed to be expert investors, savvy consumers, and fortune tellers who can predict our own health and lifespans. It's an impossible job, and the system is full of traps. The minefield looks different now, but it's just as dangerous. Years later, I was helping my parents clean out a closet and I found it. The old accordion folder, now empty. Holding it, I tried to make sense of what went wrong, and I realized their entire future had been built on a single assumption, that the promise was real. This whole ordeal was a brutal education. The most important lesson I learned is that financial security isn't something you can just set and forget. This isn't financial advice. I'm not an expert. I'm just a son who watched his parents' world get destroyed and learned some things the hard way. These are the things you can do to take back some control. First, audit every single retirement plan. Regularly. If your parents have a pension, get the annual funding notice. It will tell you if the plan is on solid ground. For your own 401ks, check the beneficiaries and fees. Assume nothing. Verify everything. Second, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Real security comes from having different sources of income, like personal savings that aren't tied to one company's fate. Third, be extremely skeptical of any financial product pushed hard on seniors. If your parents are considering a reverse mortgage, you have to step in. Talk to an independent financial advisor, not the salesman, who can explain the real risks. Fourth, get the estate planning in order. Work with a lawyer to make sure wills, trusts, and powers of attorney for both health and finances are up to date. These documents are your best defense. Finally, be the watchdog. Seniors are prime targets for scams. If your parents are looking at a retirement community, look into the company that runs it. We've seen headlines about those places going bankrupt and residents losing their huge entry deposits. Taking these steps isn't about not trusting our parents. It's about protecting them. It's about honoring their life's work by making sure it doesn't get erased by a footnote in a bankruptcy filing. You don't have to be a financial expert. You just have to ask the questions nobody asked my parents. My parents' story doesn't have a happy ending. They get by, but their retirement is a daily struggle, not the rest they earned. Sometimes I look out the window and see my father, older now, sitting on a plastic chair in the garage, his unfinished workshop. And I see my mother on the porch, tending to herbs she's planted in old, recycled coffee cans. Let this be your wake-up call. Don't wait for the letter. Open the books now. Talk to your parents, your partner, your kids. Look at your own plans. Ask the tough questions. If you or someone you know has a story like this, share it in the comments. We find community by sharing our stories, and we find strength by learning from them. He gave them everything. They gave him a number. Watch this next for another gripping tale of retirement gone wrong, plus the lesson you can't afford to miss.